Have you ever been told that black people were cursed, that Africa was abandoned by God, that your story began not in glory, but in chains bound at the wrists, carried across the sea? What if I told you that was the greatest lie in history? The Bible never began with slavery. It began with royalty, with Cush, with Egypt, with Ham. The very first pages of Scripture carried your name, your bloodline, your destiny. The Bible they used to enslave you was the same Bible that crowned you. Today we will uncover what has been hidden for centuries, from Ham to Cush, from Misra to Ethiopia, from the thrones of Africa to the very heart of God's plan. This is not just about history, it is about identity. Welcome to this journey where history meets prophecy and where identity is restored. 3 sons of Noah, 3 directions of humanity. The floodwaters receded, the ark rested on dry ground. And from that moment, the destiny of the entire human race would be traced through 3 men, the sons of Noah, Shem, Japheth, and Ham. Their names are not just genealogical markers, they are the signposts of civilization, the living roots of nations, the very framework of how history itself would unfold. Shem carried the Semitic line, the line that would give rise to Israel, to Assyria, and to the Arab peoples. Through Shem, Abraham was born, and through Abraham came the covenant, the law, and the prophets. Japheth stretched toward the north and the west. His descendants spread across Europe and the northern tribes, laying the groundwork for empires that would later shape the Western world. But then there was Ham. Ham, often maligned, misunderstood, and twisted by false interpretations, yet standing at the center of one of the greatest untold stories of Scripture. Ham fathered civilizations. From his line came the builders of Egypt, the kings of Cush, the warriors of Put, the tribes of Canaan. If Shem gave us the prophets and Japheth gave us the philosophers, Ham gave us the architects of empire, the gold of Nubia, the mathematics of the Nile, and the wisdom that astonished ancient kings. The soil of Ham's descendants became the cradle of black civilization, the very ground where human ingenuity met divine providence. Without Ham, there is no Africa. Without Africa, there is no Bible. The very stage upon which the story of redemption unfolds, the Exodus, Joseph's rise in Egypt. Moses' confrontation with Pharaoh, all of it was set in the lands of Ham. The prophet spoke of Cush and Misraim. The psalmist sang of the tents of Ham. Africa was not an afterthought. It was the stage. It was the center. The so-called curse of Ham was fabricated to erase the dignity of an entire people. A theological weapon forged to justify slavery and oppression. Ham was never cursed. The curse fell only on Canaan, not on Ham, not on Africa, not on the millions of descendants who would shape the ancient world. The truth is that Ham's line was not rejected. It was chosen to build kingdoms that carried the weight of prophecy and prepared the way for God's plan of salvation. With 3 brothers standing at the dawn of history, with Shem, Japheth, and Ham dividing the nations. But one of them, Ham, bearing a legacy that the world tried to erase. And if Ham's line carried the weight of nations, what would his sons create? What kingdoms would rise from his bloodline? To answer that, we must journey into the heart of Africa, into the land of Cush, the meaning of Ham and his lineage. To understand the story of Ham, we must begin with his very name. In Hebrew, Ham means black, hot, burned. It was not a slur. It was not a mark of shame. It was a description of identity, of skin, of strength, of the radiant imprint of the sun upon his descendants. In the ancient world, names were never random. They were prophecies, reflections of destiny. Ham's very name announced that his children would carry a distinct appearance, a visible sign that set them apart as a chosen branch of humanity. From Ham came 4 sons, and through them 4 streams of nations flowed into history. First was Cush, the root of Ethiopia and Nubia, whose kings once ruled with wealth and wisdom that shook the ancient world. Then came Misraim, the Hebrew name for Egypt, the land of pyramids, pharaohs, and the wisdom that defined civilization itself. Next was Put, tied to the regions of Libya and North Africa, a people remembered for their warriors, soldiers, and mercenaries who stood at the heart of alliances and empires. And finally, Canaan, whose tribes would occupy the land, promised to Abraham a land that would become the battlefield of faith. These were not minor tribes lost in the footnotes of history. They were the foundations of kingdoms, the pillars of trade, the centers of science, astronomy, mathematics, and warfare. When the psalmist sang of the tents of Ham, he was not speaking of weakness. He was naming an entire branch of humanity whose influence stretched across the known world. Ham was not erased. His name is carved into nations. You can still trace it in the gold of Cush, in the stone of the pyramids, in the warriors of North Africa, and even in the biblical stories where these nations appear again and again. To erase Ham is to erase the very soil of Scripture, because the Bible itself was lived out on the lands of his descendants. What many have called a curse was in reality a calling. The color of Ham's line was never a burden. It was a sacred signature, a mark of divine artistry. Blackness was not a shadow to be hidden. It was light refracted differently, a mirror of God's image in all its diversity. And if Ham's name became nations, then within those nations lies a story that cannot be ignored. But among his sons, one stood as a beacon of glory, the empire builder, the kingdom shaper. To uncover this, we must journey into the world of Cush. Cush, Ethiopia, and Nubia, the Golden Kingdom. When the name Cush appears in Scripture, it is more than a geographic marker. It is the echo of a kingdom whose influence radiated far beyond the Nile. Cush was Ethiopia, and Nubia, the realm of black kings, a civilization forged in strength, diplomacy, and war. They were not a people hiding in the shadows of history. They stood at the very crossroads of the ancient world. The Cushites built a dynasty that rivaled Egypt itself. Their armies were feared, their wealth legendary, their wisdom sought after by foreign rulers. Gold, ivory, incense, and rare treasures poured from their lands. The prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah spoke of Cush not as a forgotten nation, but as one honored in the designs of God. Isaiah declared, "Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God." In the biblical imagination, Cush was not cursed. It was destined to worship and to lead. The pinnacle of Kushite power came with the 25th dynasty, when black pharaohs ruled over all of Egypt. For nearly a century, Nubian kings sat upon the throne of the world's greatest empire, wearing the crowns of both Cush and Egypt. Their monuments, their temples, their armies testified that Africa was not a footnote to history, but its beating heart. The story of empire cannot be told without Cush. Yet the Bible's testimony is not only about kingdoms, but about individuals. In Numbers 12, Moses, the prophet of prophets, married a Cushite woman. His own brother Aaron and sister Miriam rose against him, questioning his decision. But God himself intervened. He struck Miriam with leprosy and defended the dignity of the Cushite woman. The message was unmistakable. The color of her skin was no barrier to the covenant, no obstacle to the divine plan. If God defended the black woman against prophets who can stand against his choice, this is not just a verse. It is a verdict, a declaration that the worth of Cush was sealed by heaven itself. Cush was not a side note to Shem's story or Japheth's legacy. It was a central chapter in God's unfolding drama. To erase Cush is to erase the testimony of Scripture. And if Cush rose to such power, what about the brother nations born of Ham? What about Misraim, the land the Bible calls the house of bondage, yet the cradle of miracles? Misraim, Egypt, land of Ham. If Cush was the rising sun of Africa's power, then Misraim, Egypt, was its blazing noon. Again and again, Scripture calls Egypt the land of Ham. Psalm 105 declares it openly, tying the great empire of the Nile directly to the son of Noah, whose legacy has been hidden for too long. Egypt was not an outsider to the biblical story. It was the stage on which some of God's greatest acts unfolded. It was to Egypt that Abraham journeyed when famine struck the land of Canaan. It was in Egypt that Joseph, once sold as a slave, rose to become prime minister, second only to Pharaoh himself. A testimony that God could raise the lowliest man into a throne of power. And it was in Egypt that the Exodus was born. the most dramatic confrontation between God and empire the world has ever known. The plagues, the Red Sea, the cry of deliverance, all of it happened in the land of Ham. Yet history has played a cruel trick. The Egypt we see in movies, in paintings, in the pages of Western history is a whitened Egypt. Pharaohs are portrayed with European features, the builders of pyramids painted with pale skin. But the truth written in both archaeology and scripture is unshakable. Egypt was a black civilization. Its rulers were sons of Ham. Its culture was African at its core. Its brilliance was born from the soil of Africa, not imported from elsewhere. The pyramids were not built by white hands. They were the fingerprints of Africa. Their geometry, their precision, their alignment with the stars. These were not the inventions of outsiders. They were the testimony of African genius, the wisdom of Ham's descendants carved into stone for eternity. The cradle of Israel's deliverance was not a European land, not a neutral desert, but a black land. When God chose the place where his people would be forged in the furnace of oppression and redeemed by his mighty hand, he chose Africa. The Exodus was not merely about leaving slavery, it was about leaving Egypt a kingdom of Ham and carrying its imprint forever in Israel's story. To erase the blackness of Egypt is to erase the truth of Scripture. But if Egypt was the furnace of deliverance, then what of its brother nation, Put, the warrior son of Ham? What role did his descendants play in the armies and alliances of the Bible, Put, the warrior line of North Africa? From the fertile Nile of Misraim, our journey moves westward to the rugged lands of Put. In the Bible, Put is closely linked with Libya and the surrounding regions of North Africa. While Cush became a kingdom of wealth and Mizra a cradle of wisdom, Put earned its renown on the battlefield. Here was a people forged by struggle, remembered not for palaces or temples, but for courage, steel, and loyalty in war. Ezekiel 35 places Put among Egypt's allies, standing in military coalitions that shook the ancient Near East. Whenever armies marched, the name of Put appeared among them. Their skill with weapons, their fearlessness in combat, and their reputation as mercenaries made them indispensable. The kings of the ancient world sought their swords because they knew Put fought with the strength of lions. Put's legacy reveals an often forgotten truth that Africa was not only the land of kingdoms and temples, but also the backbone of armies. Their men became defenders, protectors, and fighters whose presence shifted the balance of power. From Libya's deserts to the Mediterranean coasts, the sons of Put had a tradition of military honor. They were not a hidden people. They were on the front lines of history. Even Israel's battles were fought with African swords at their side. When the prophet spoke of wars and alliances, when nations rose and fell, the sons of Put were there. Their spears clashed alongside Egypt. Their shields formed the walls of empire. Their loyalty was recorded in the words of the prophets. But the story of Put is more than war. It is about recognition. Too often the image of Africa in the Bible has been erased or diminished, reduced to silence. Yet the truth is undeniable. Africa's warriors stood in scripture written into the same verses that record Israel's destiny. Their presence testifies that the story of salvation was never a European tale alone. It was global, and Africa's sons carried the weight of it in blood and battle. And yet while Put reminds us of Africa's strength in arms, another shadow has long haunted the memory of Ham's descendants. A distortion, a lie, a so-called curse that reshaped the view of black people for centuries. What if the curse never existed? What if the truth was something entirely different? To answer that, we must confront one of the darkest twists in history, the myth of the curse of Ham. The lie of the curse of Ham. Few lies in human history have carried as much weight or caused as much devastation as the so-called curse of Ham. For centuries, preachers, politicians, and oppressors pointed to Genesis 9, twisting its words into a weapon. They claimed that Ham, the father of Africa, was cursed. They declared that blackness was a mark of shame, a divine sentence to servitude. And with that lie, entire systems of slavery, colonization, and racism were baptized with false theology. The Bible never says that Ham was cursed. After Noah awoke from his drunkenness, the curse fell not upon Ham, but upon Canaan, one of Ham's 4 sons. Genesis 9:25 reads, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. It was Canaan, not Ham, not Cush, not Mizraim, not Put who bore that prophecy. Africa was never cursed. The land of Ham was never rejected by God. So why does the myth persist? Because the distortion was convenient. Slave traders needed a justification. Colonizers needed a doctrine. Racists needed a scripture they could twist to sanctify their greed. And thus the curse of Ham was invented, repeated, and eventually taught as if it were divine truth. It was not. It was theology bent into chains. The curse of Ham was the curse of a doctrine, not of a people. It was the corruption of interpretation, not the judgment of God. And yet this false doctrine shaped centuries of oppression. It painted black skin as sinful, African descent as inferior, and slavery as inevitable. It turned pulpits into platforms of prejudice and sermons into shackles, but the Bible itself testifies against this lie. The same scriptures that were twisted to enslave also preserve the truth that restores dignity. In the Psalms, Egypt and Cush are honored. In the prophets, Ethiopia is pictured stretching its hands to God. In the New Testament, Africans stand at the heart of the gospel story. The myth collapses under the weight of Scripture itself. This revelation is more than history. It is liberation. To expose the lie is to reclaim the truth that Africa was never cursed but always chosen, always present, always woven into God's design. And if the so-called curse was a deception, then the Bible must hold evidence of blessing. What if Africa's role was not rejection, but divine selection? To see that we must turn to the witnesses of Scripture, where black dignity is defended by God Himself, biblical evidence of black dignity. If the curse of Ham was a lie, then what does the Bible truly reveal about Africa and her people? The evidence is not hidden. It is written in plain sight. Again and again, Scripture testifies to the dignity, the chosenness, and the central role of black lives in God's unfolding plan. Moses married a Cushite woman, a daughter of the land of Cush. His own siblings, Miriam and Aaron, rose against him, questioning his decision and criticizing her heritage. But before Moses could even respond, God Himself entered the debate. He struck Miriam with leprosy and defended the Cushite woman's honor. The message was unmistakable. Her blackness was not a blemish, but a blessing. God's defense was divine vindication. When prophets spoke against her, heaven itself silenced them. And then centuries later, another African steps onto the stage of redemption. In Acts 8, an Ethiopian eunuch, an official of great authority under Queen Candace, encounters the Apostle Philip. Riding in his chariot, he reads from the scroll of Isaiah. Yearning to understand, Philip explains the prophecy of the suffering Messiah. And there in the wilderness road, the Ethiopian asks the eternal question, "What prevents me from being baptized?" He steps into the water, confesses his faith, and emerges a believer. This man became one of the first recorded converts to Christianity. And when he returned to Ethiopia, he carried the gospel to Africa. The first to carry the gospel back to a continent was a black man. This is not a footnote, it is a foundation. The gospel spread to Europe later, but Africa was among the first to hear, to believe, to embrace. Africa then was not peripheral to the gospel story, it was central. From Moses' wife defended by God to the Ethiopian eunuch baptized by Philip, the biblical record is clear. Black dignity is affirmed, honored, and woven into the heart of salvation history. The very people once branded as cursed are revealed as carriers of blessing. The very continent dismissed as forgotten is shown to be foundational. Scripture does not erase Africa, it exalts her. And yet this dignity raises a deeper question. If God's image is revealed in every nation, then what does skin color truly mean in the theology of creation? To answer this, we must return to the beginning, to Adam, Eve, and the divine artistry of humanity. Theology of humanity and color. If Africa's presence in Scripture is undeniable, then we must ask a deeper question. What does the Bible truly say about color? To answer, we must return to the garden, to the first breath of humanity. Adam and Eve were not created with categories of black or white, east or west. They were created in the image of God. Genesis declares that humanity reflects the likeness of the Creator, and that likeness transcends skin. It is spirit, reason, creativity, and dignity. No verse in Scripture binds God's image to one complexion. Instead, it affirms that every shade, every tone, every variation of humanity bears the fingerprints of the divine. The Apostle Paul, preaching in Athens, makes it even clearer in Acts 17:26. From one man he made all nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. From one breath, one body, one origin came the diversity of humanity. Our differences are not divisions, they are design. The scattering of nations was not a punishment but a multiplication of God's artistry. Skin color then is not incidental, it is intentional. It is the canvas upon which God painted the masterpiece of humanity. The warmth of brown, the depth of black, the variety of tones across the earth, they are not accidents of biology, they are brush strokes of divinity. Color is not a curse, it is God's signature. It is the seal of His creativity, a reminder that His image cannot be contained in one tribe or limited to one nation. Every face reflects a different angle of His glory. To despise color, therefore, is to despise the Creator's work. To exalt one shade and demean another is not merely prejudice. It is blasphemy against the artistry of God Himself. If every hue carries divine intention, then the hatred of blackness is exposed not only as racism, but as rebellion against heaven. The rejection of Africa's place in Scripture is not ignorance alone. It is an assault on the theology of creation. If humanity was crafted as one and color was designed as divine art, what does that mean for the destiny of nations? What future awaits when all colors, all peoples, all tongues stand before the throne together? To glimpse that vision, we must turn to the final chapters of the story, to identity restored, to prophecy fulfilled, and to the glory of every nation in Revelation. Identity restored. The time has come to gather the fragments to see the story whole. For too long, the narrative of black identity has been forced to begin with chains, with plantations, with the Middle Passage. But the Bible tells another beginning. The black story begins in Eden, where all humanity bore the image of God. It continues with the ark, where Ham and his sons stepped into a new world. It shines in Cush, where Nubian kings and queens ruled in majesty. It towers in Egypt, where the brilliance of African genius shaped the very stage of redemption. And it resounds in Acts, where an Ethiopian carried the gospel back to his homeland. Africa is not an afterthought in Scripture. It is chosen. Its people are not cursed. They are royal. Its purpose is not marginal. It is sacred. Every empire, every kingdom, every prophet who crossed paths with Africa testifies to this truth. God's plan has always included the sons and daughters of Ham. The final vision of Revelation confirms what history tried to erase. In Revelation 7:9, John looks and sees a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. In that crowd, the voices of Africa rise, clothed in white, crowned in victory. The presence of black people before the throne is not symbolic. It is literal. The hands once forced to build pyramids, the backs once bent under chains, are now lifted in worship, redeemed in glory. Your name was never cursed. Your crown was never stolen. It was hidden, waiting for you to take it back. This is the heartbeat of identity restored. The story of Africa is not one of abandonment, but of anticipation. Not one of erasure, but of resurrection. What was silenced is now spoken. What was despised is now exalted. And so the lie unravels. History bends. Prophecy speaks. Identity is restored. To reclaim this truth is to reclaim destiny itself. For if Revelation shows the nations in glory, then no tribe is forgotten, no people are erased. And Africa's story is not just survival, it is eternal significance. To know the past is not enough. We must step into the call of the present. And that brings us to the conclusion. A summons for every black son and daughter to rise, to break the chains of falsehood, and to walk in the inheritance written from the beginning. Identity restored. Destiny awakened. The evidence has been laid bare. From Eden to the Ark, from Cush to Egypt, from the prophets to the apostles. The thread of Africa runs through the Bible like veins of gold. And now the question is no longer about history alone. It is about you. What will you do with the truth that has been restored? Rise, reclaim your identity, tear down the lies, and step into your true inheritance. For centuries, the narrative was stolen, rewritten by conquerors and theologians who feared the truth. History was written to erase you, but prophecy was written to restore you. The erasers of men cannot silence the handwriting of God. The black story is not a tragedy to be endured, but a testimony to be proclaimed. You are not the descendants of a curse. You are the heirs of a covenant. The soil of Africa, the kingdoms of Ham, the blood of Cush, the glory of Misraim, the courage of Put. These are not accidents of history. They are markers of destiny. You were not forgotten, not overlooked, not cast aside. You were chosen royal and written into the plan of redemption from the very beginning. History is not forgotten. Identity is not erased. The bloodline has been redeemed. And the story of black people is the story of God's glory. This truth is not meant to remain in books or sermons. It must be lived. It must awaken dignity in the hearts of the young, and it must heal the scars carried by the old. It must challenge the systems that still profit from lies. And it must ignite a fire that no empire can quench. The chains of falsehood are already broken. All that remains is for you to walk free. The nations are gathering, prophecy is unfolding, and the throne is waiting. And if the Bible has revealed Africa's hidden crown, what else lies veiled in its pages? If black identity is hidden in the scripture, what about the angels who stood beside the throne of God? The story we have uncovered is not only about history, it is about life, dignity, and the way we see ourselves today. For too long, false narratives have told you that your worth is measured by what was taken from you. But the Bible shows that your value was written long before chains, long before oppression, long before men rewrote history. To those of you who have lived many years, who have carried the weight of injustice, disappointment, or silence, hear this truth. Your age does not erase your purpose. The God who defended the Cushite woman, the God who called the Ethiopian eunuch, is the same God who still sees you. Identity is not just for the young to discover. It is for the old to reclaim, to hand down, to leave as a legacy. Your story did not begin with shame, and it does not end with despair. You are part of a bloodline redeemed, a crown restored, a testimony still unfolding. Teach the next generation to walk in dignity. Remind them that their color, their culture, their heritage are God's signature. And let your final years be marked not by regret, but by the freedom of truth that no lie can erase.